Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, April 7th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. A solar development in eastern Kern County could power thousands of homes, but is also demolishing thousands of plants known as Joshua trees.
It's like it's a big part of our history is all getting killed off.
Coming up, we'll hear about the conflict heating up in California's Mojave Desert as the state grapples with producing green energy. But first, these headlines. Protests, marches, and rallies were held this weekend in the Valley. It was part of the nationwide hands-off movement that's countering much of President Trump's agenda. Among the issues, the protests highlighted cuts to the federal government, mass deportations, and cuts to health care. Locally, protests were held in various cities, including Merced, Fresno, Visalia, and Bakersfield. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is bringing his so-called Fight Oligarchy tour to the Valley later this month. He'll be speaking at Dignity Health Arena in Bakersfield on April 15th. Sanders will also be joined by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The two have been making stops in Republican districts across the country to speak out against billionaire influence in the U.S. government. As President Donald Trump's tariffs are implemented across the U.S., California Governor Gavin Newsom is urging international trade partners to exempt California products. Cap Radio's Laura Fitzgerald reports.
California is the world's fifth largest economy and the largest importer in the U.S. As sweeping tariffs take effect, Newsom says his administration is looking for ways for California to maintain its global economic edge. He posted remarks in a video on social media.
Donald Trump's tariffs do not represent all Americans.
The Newsom administration says it's looking for ways to preserve international trade relationships. Newsom also asked partners to consider sparing California products from any retaliatory tariffs.
I'll remind all our international trading partners, California is a stable trading partner, and we hope you consider that as it relates to California-made products.
Newsom says the tariffs could have a devastating effect on the state economy and impact access to construction materials needed to rebuild in Los Angeles following the fires. In Sacramento, I'm Laura Fitzgerald.
We now know who will fill a vacant seat on the Fresno City Council following last month's special election. KVPR's Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado reports on the final vote count.
The Fresno County Registrar of Voters had a deadline of Friday to certify its election results, and the final update kept Brandon Vang on top with 50.1% of the votes. That's enough for him to win the seat for the Fresno City Council's 5th District. Vang will be the second person of Hmong heritage to serve on the council. That's significant for a city with the second largest Hmong population in the country. Vang was challenged by Elizabeth Jonathan Rosas. She's a current Fresno Unified trustee, and her husband, Luis Chavez, held the vacant council seat before being elected to the County Board of Supervisors in November. According to the elections office, just 12% of residents in Fresno's 5th District turned out to vote. For KVPR News, I'm Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado.
Raise a glass with KVPR, Sunday afternoon, May 4th, for KVPR's wine tasting and more, featuring fine wines from California and beyond, local craft beer, delicious food, live music, and a silent auction, all on the amazing grounds of the Lester Estate in Fresno, where Van Ness Extension meets the San Joaquin River. All proceeds benefit KVPR, so purchase your tickets today at kvpr.org/wine.
And now to our main story. California's Mojave Desert has endless sunshine. Solar developers see it as a source for growing the state's renewable energy supply. And that'll come in handy as the state looks to meet ambitious clean energy goals. Building out solar energy infrastructure in the desert, however, could come at the expense of a Mojave Desert icon, the Joshua tree. That's what locals fear is happening in the historic town of Boron. KVPR's Joshua Yeager takes us there.
Allison Capusta has lived in Boron for decades.
Hi.
How are you? She volunteers at a local museum honoring the town's aerospace history. The massive Edwards Air Force Base is not far away. But today, Kapusta isn't looking up at the skies. Instead, she's focused on the landscape outside, which she says has changed drastically over the past year. See, it used to be
Very well coated with Joshua trees, so it would look like desert land with a lot of the Joshua trees to it.
but now
They're gone, and they demolished up the Joshuas, and that's what ruffled the feathers of the turkeys in this town, you know?
in their place is a large construction site, the early stages of an energy project called the Aratina Solar Center. Officials say it'll cover some 2,000 acres and generate enough power for 160,000 homes. Kapusta and others have flooded board meetings in Kern County with concerns about the project. They believe the trade-off, Joshua trees for energy production, isn't worth it.
It's like it's a big part of our history is all getting killed off.
A new state law forbids the removal of Joshuas without a special permit. But a state commission fast-tracked approvals for more than a dozen solar projects in the desert before the law was passed. Aratina's was one of the largest. It covers thousands of Joshua trees.
That is a lot.
Cameron Barrows is a research scientist at UC Riverside. He studied Joshua trees for decades and says the species is already seriously threatened by climate change.
So much hotter and so much drier that the young Joshua trees don't have water storage abilities, and they succumb to being dried out essentially.
Research shows that desert ecosystems are highly effective at pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and storing it in the soil. Barrows argues disturbing this environment to build solar panels is counterproductive.
It will take at least a century or more of the solar plant operating before it equals the amount of carbon that the natural landscape is doing on its own for free.
But officials with Avantis disagree. That's the company behind the Boron project. A spokesperson told KVPR the company is stepping up to help California's grid go carbon neutral by 2045. Avantis agreed to pay $1.3 million into a fund to help protect Joshuas. They also plan to establish a large conservation area in eastern Kern County.
It is kind of like, double-edged sword a little bit. Like, in order for you to have funds to do the conservation, trees must be removed.
Drew Kaiser is an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's overseeing the creation of a conservation plan for Joshua trees under the new state law.
The spirit of it was to balance, how do we move forward with conserving a species while also kind of helping, California meet its renewable energy goals.
Finding that balance, he says, is tricky. The state is working with advocates, industry groups, and locals as it finalizes the draft plan. But the solar industry is putting its thumb on the scale with a massive lobbying blitz. A KVPR analysis found the industry has spent some $2 million since 2020 to influence lawmakers and agencies on the Joshua Tree legislation. A state commission must now vote on whether to adopt the Joshua Tree Conservation Plan by the end of June. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Boron.
And Joshua joins me now to discuss his reporting a little further. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Liz.
So first, I was curious. In your report, you mentioned that there are more than a dozen other solar projects popping up across the state. Where are they located, and are they mainly being placed in the desert?
Yeah, so those are projects the state specifically cleared a while back to destroy some Joshua trees in the desert. A state commission invoked a rarely used emergency code to justify the approvals, saying they were needed to help the state achieve its clean energy goals. In the meantime, the state has passed a new law that kind of provides more protections for Joshua trees, but it includes a fee structure that basically allows developers to pay to remove Joshuas. And those funds would then be used by the state in its conservation efforts.
Okay, so with this project, I understand there are also some concerns that the construction could have some unintended impacts on the health of local residents, right?
Yeah, valley fever is a big concern here, according to my reporting. A group of residents tested the soil where the solar project is being built before the construction started, and they found the fungal spores that cause the disease, which, can be deadly and cause a lot of problems. Scientists I spoke to say the valley fever fungus can sort of thrive in land that has not been touched. So land that just hasn't been disturbed for a long time. And so when you come in and build these big infrastructure projects, that's obviously, disturbing a lot of land. And that can send these valley fever spores flying long distances where they can infect, nearby towns. So that's why residents in Boron have been concerned. But it can also be a problem for solar workers themselves. There have been documented cases of outbreaks among solar workers, building solar projects. Now, I should say that Avantis, the company behind this specific solar project, says they're taking precautions to make sure that that doesn't happen. They say they're, keeping the ground wet and controlling dust from the construction site, so to sort of minimize the threat of valley fever.
Got it. So this boron project is being partially done because of all the open land in the desert, as well as the climate, obviously. Are there any plans to maybe build solar energy plants in other areas that have a lot of available land?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what scientists and conservationists I spoke to are pushing for. They say, that if solar does have to be built in the desert, then they say it should go in areas where the land has already kind of been disturbed. Mainly, this is agricultural land that's been abandoned, maybe because there isn't enough water or irrigation to keep that land in production, so it's been abandoned. They say that would be an ideal sort of place to build these solar projects because, the land's already been disturbed, it's already been cleared out. The Joshua trees there are gone. The valley, there's a reduced risk of valley fever being in the soil there.
Anything else you'd like to add, Josh?
Yeah, the state is set to vote on its conservation plan in June, and that'll basically set the rules for how developers can proceed in the Mojave, where this species has historically thrived. Researchers I spoke to say that if we don't take action on climate change in the immediate term, then Joshuas can go basically extinct within the next 100 years. So this is the first legislation of its kind in the nation, and it's something that we'll be keeping an eye on.
KVPR reporter Joshua Yeager. Thanks for this reporting, Josh.
Thanks, Liz.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.